Well, welcome to the Are We Well podcast. I am honored to have both of you here join me today. We're going to talk about divorce and sort of the emotional implications of divorce and the impacts it has on families and children. And you two are going to be the best to represent this conversation. I'm so excited. So Nicole Salazar-Hall is a shareholder at Parson Bale and Latimer Family Law Group. Did I say that right? I always
Parsons, Bailey, and Latimer.
Okay, see there. Thank you. Thank you for correcting that. Where she supports individuals navigating high-stakes legal challenges, from complex custody cases to high net worth property divisions. She also works closely with Utah's Juvenile Court and the Division of Child and Family Services, bringing both strength and care to very emotionally charged situations. And then alongside her is Dr. Natalie Malovich, a clinical psychologist with 4 decades of experience. After 20 years in traditional practice focused on child and family therapy and adults healing from childhood trauma, she shifted her work toward high conflict divorce. She's now a full-time domestic mediator, helping parents find healthier ways to co-parent. And you also teach an online course around co-parenting.
Right.
And so together, this legal and the psychological parts of it is this. It's a great pair. So, and it's really funny because I actually was on the phone with my aunt this morning, and she was just, we were just chit chatting, and I told her that later on I was going to record a podcast episode around sort of divorce and unpacking divorce, and she's just like, oh, divorce? Why? Why are you going to talk about that? And, I come from a traditional, South Asian family. She's a very traditional woman.
Divorce does not exist.
Divorce is a bad word.
Right.
And so, but then I grew up in a divorce household. My mom was one of the first in our family to get a divorce. So she really just went against the grain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because I grew up in a divorced household, but I was so afraid to talk about it. I felt so much shame. Mm-hmm. And I felt like if I said something, that would mean something about me as a child. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious now, because divorce is so common. I don't even know what the statistics are now. I think at some point it was more than half of marriages end up in divorce.
It still is, yeah.
So, it's a very common thing, but is there still a stigma around divorce? The even just the word divorce, is there a stigma around it still? Or do you feel like it's kind of a common thing at the moment? People have widely accepted that is a natural part, or could be a natural part of a marriage.
I think it depends on which communities you're a part of and where you were raised, where you live. I will say that in Salt Lake Valley, I think it is less stigmatized. Same with Summit County and likely even Tooele County. Weber County, depending on where you're at in the county, also less stigmatization around it. But Utah County, some of the more rural districts here in Utah, definitely. It still does carry quite a bit of shame. And the clients that I see come through the door from those more rural counties and from Utah County, there is a sense of shame for them walking in the door and meeting me. There's a lot of, I'm sorry, I have to be here. I'm so sorry, I'm emotional. It's a lot of shame around that, the fact that they're even meeting with me about divorce.
Yeah. Do you feel like that stigma holds people back from actually getting the divorce? Because I'm even thinking about just people in my family, and they stayed in these marriages that probably should have been ended up in a divorce, but they stayed because of what will people say about me? What will people think about our family? I wonder if that's still the case. And I think you're right, with depending on the culture and the background and upbringing. Yeah. But do you see a lot of that too?
I think to some extent, yeah. And I also think that parents in particular stay in very unhappy relationships because of their fears about its impact on their children and how it's going to affect the kids. And there's kind of still a cultural belief system, I think, that children of divorce really struggle. And back when I started graduate school many years ago, we were taught children of divorce are more likely to end up in prison. They're more likely to have unsuccessful relationships. They're going to struggle financially. It was just a list of all negative outcomes. And over time, what we've learned a lot more about how to prevent those impacts, and how, if parents are doing things in an appropriate way and parents are working together in as positive a way possible and being healthy co-parents, kids can be very, very healthy and resilient in response as well. So it doesn't have to be that damaging for kids. But I think parents are still really afraid of it.
Very much so. And it's not uncommon that I have a client in the office saying, I should have done this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
I don't know why I've stayed this long. I was afraid. For my domestic violence survivors, it's pretty clear why they didn't sooner. It's a very difficult cycle to break out of. So I do some kind of part-time armchair psychologist work with those clients of saying, don't be ashamed of getting into this relationship, staying as long as you did. This is very difficult. The cycle of violence is incredibly real. You're here now. Focus on that. Don't look back. No. Don't look at what you should have done. Focus on what you can do now for you and for your children. And I will say that the clients that I have some very frank upfront conversations about divorce that don't start off in a crisis, and I will preface that. The ones that start off in a crisis are very difficult. But the ones who come to me saying, okay, I think I'm ready, I want to do this, I have a very frank conversation with them up front of what to do and not to do to traumatize their children. And it's primarily, you need to be healthy, and the children need you to be healthy. They need to see you handling this crisis in a healthy, positive way, because they will look to you as to how to act in this process. So if you are constantly crying at home, you're rolling your eyes, you're gritting your teeth every time your ex calls, the children are going to pick up on that, and it's going to be awful for them. They're going to see this as a horrible, horrible thing. But if you say, look, yes, I'm feeling big emotions right now, this is difficult, but mom's got it, or, dad's got this, I can handle this, I have a team, I have adults helping me. You guys just focus on being children. What happened between your other parent and I is between us. It's not your fault, and you just focus on being a kid, and we'll take care of it. The outcomes for those children are way better than those of parents who are involving the kids and talking to them and leaving pleadings out in the open for them to see.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
It seems like, and I'd be curious, it seems like before a divorce happens, I mean, there's a whole story that kind of leads up to this moment. It seems that, that practice might have started early. So depending on the kids or maybe pitting the kids against one another starts early.
Oh, yes.
Is that, and
Yes.
how do you then break that pattern at a point of divorce?
Sometimes you never do.
It's really hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we see this even in terms of co-parenting. Like, one of the things I say to folks in our co-parenting classes, many people who are getting divorced never learned to co-parent even in their marriage. They didn't ever have a cooperative, healthy working relationship with their kids. And so the groundwork for a dysfunctional co-parenting relationship is already laid by the time they divorce.
Yeah.
One parent is maybe bullying and exclusionary toward the other parent, or maybe one parent is the dominant caretaker and they are overprotective with the children and interfere in the other parent's relationship. And so these weird marital dynamics filter into the parenting, and that can really complicate things for the kids.
Yeah.
Very much so, because when you divorce, it doesn't get any better. That communication does not improve at all. Though the way the courts are set up is they kind of expect you to. And there are a few commissioners who have picked that up, and commissioners are what we see first in the 3rd district, well, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th districts. They're hired and fired. They're not Article 3 judges. They're just hired by the administrative office of the courts, but they handle only domestic matters. And some of them have come to say, I understand that you're here because you could not communicate in your marriage, and I know we're expecting you now to communicate effectively for your children, and that's a tall order. But you're still the adults in the room. Act that way.
Yeah.
So it does, that lack of co-parenting even during the marriage, I think, leads to some of our greatest high conflict cases where you see protective orders and DCFS referrals and abuse allegations and motions for enforcement and for sanctions filed, and just horrible conflict, and cases where we have to get custody evaluators like what Dr. Malovich used to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you know sort of what the patterns are of why people end up looking and seeking divorce? Like, what are some of the main reasons today? Has that changed?
I'm not sure if it's changed or not. I can say what I've noticed is there seems to be different groups of people who are divorcing. There are the ones who married incredibly young, like straight out of college, some even straight out of high school.
And
are
especially
now,
here in Utah.
especially here in Utah, yes. And some of the expectations that they were told when they were marrying was, this is going to be bliss. This is your reward for following the scripture and following Heavenly Father and the Spirit. And what they have not been taught is that marriage is work. And it's not just you get married and they lived happily ever after. It is a day-to-day thing. It's a living, breathing entity that you have to keep alive. You have to feed. And if you are mismatched with your partner, it's just not going to work. And a lot of them don't realize that. So the women forego a career, they stay home to raise the children. And then when a midlife crisis happens, or 40s, sometimes even 30s, one of them looks back and goes, I am not happy. And then we're stuck with a divorce. The other side that I see are, funny enough, very strong independent women who married men who are not as motivated. And so
that's a common one, huh?
That is also, I've been seeing that one a lot more.
Interesting.
A lot
has that
more.
changed more recently, or has that always been the case?
I've been seeing it more in the last probably 5 to 8 years.
Okay, yeah.
Of course, there's always going to be the standard. We're in our 50s, I'm done, or the standard, he cheated or she cheated. Yeah. There are always going to be some domestic violence cases thrown in there, but those are kind of the two larger parts that I see. And what makes it challenging for those strong independent women is they sometimes have to pay spousal support. And that is rough, or child support.
Yeah.
And that can be really hard.
I see a lot of those folks in mediation as well,
Yeah.
where oftentimes it's not unusual for a dad to have been the stay-at-home parent and caring for the kids, and that may have been mutually decided, but there are other factors that underlie that. So that person may have been less successful in their career or less motivated, and so it causes a lot of ruffles, a lot of problems down the road.
Interesting.
When they have to deal with some of those realities.
Wow. Is there a gender? I'm curious. If we were to just in the binary gender, male and female, is there have men become less motivated? Is that something you're seeing, that you would see more women in these that are very successful or in these highly motivated careers? Has there been a trend on that, or has it
nationwide? There has been that trend. I've been reading articles on that just in some of the legal journals for family law. That is trending more nationwide, and it is being seen a lot more in the larger markets like New York, LA, Chicago. We're not seeing it as much here, because Salt Lake, Utah tends to be a good 40, 50 years behind the times. So I suspect we will see it in the future. We still tend to be a pretty male-dominated culture in the workforce.
Yeah, and I'm curious if like gender roles has, because of that, has sort of switched a bit.
It is
traditional gender roles,
right?
I think it's changed, and in some ways for the better, certainly. I mean,
absolutely.
What we see with fathers being involved with their kids' lives, and the whole movement toward fathers' rights and fathers getting more involved, and the courts recognizing that kids do best if they have a lot of contact with both parents. There's some really healthy trends. But it's hard. I think it's complicated in terms of resolving issues after divorce, because a lot of parents, particularly moms, have a little bit of a hard time wrapping their head around it, especially if they've been raised in very traditional families. This idea that they're getting divorced and now they have to share their kids equally with their husband, for example, is a pretty challenging road to follow.
Oh, very, very much so.
Yeah.
Especially when they're having to give up their children half the time, or 40% of the time, but their husband doesn't want to pay them any amount of alimony or child support, and they have no career, no job prospects. They can't live the life they were used to. There's an article in the Tribune here recently that covered that, and it was specifically with women who are Latter-day Saint women, and I would say I've seen a lot of that circumstance in my office. And it is very difficult. The main question is, he was never around. So now why does he get the children half the time? He doesn't know to take them to their practices. He has no idea who their doctors are. He's never taken them to the dentist. He doesn't know about this kid's special diet. And I'm supposed to share my children with him half the time when he doesn't want to pay me anything. And so it is a very difficult pill to swallow. It's a lot of counseling, lawyer counseling to get them to calm down. And more often than not, in the temporary, we'll either see the dad really step up to the plate and learn it and do well, and that calms mom down a lot. Or he fails and just says, yeah, you just take them. I'll have every other weekend, and I'll do a couple evenings a week, because it just fits better with what they do. They realize that picking the kids up after school is really a difficult thing to do. It's hard to break away from work at 2:30 to pick up a kid by 3 and have him home, and then your workday isn't done. You still got to do work, and you've got to get dinner on the table, and oh wait, no, kid has soccer practice, and the other one has baseball practice, and the third one has dance.
Yeah.
How am I going to do this? And so there are some dads who just get overwhelmed and call it and say, no, I'm not doing this.
Interesting.
And just go to minimum or a different alternative schedule.
Yeah.
The other thing I see is a lot of families where typically the father has stepped away, or a parent has stepped away from the family life because of the marital distress. So the more distressed and unpleasant or aversive the marital relationship becomes, the more they work late, the more business trips they accept, the more they stay away from the home.
Yeah.
And by default, the less involved they are with the kids. And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
sometimes you see this dynamic where a dad really is ready to step up and wants to be more involved. And there's a mom kind of going, well, he wasn't that involved before. Why does he want to be a half-time dad now?
Right.
And I've seen, some dads go through amazing transformations into being great half-time parents.
Oh, absolutely.
In those circumstances. But it's again, a hard pill to swallow for a mom who's been the primary caretaker.
Very much so. Yeah, I've had many dads who are diagnosed as depressed during the marriage, and mom uses that. But as soon as they're out of the house, they're away from that relationship, and they're starting to heal themselves, the depression essentially disappears. And it comes out that it was really more situational, that it was being in that relationship was damaging for them. And so then it's really difficult to convince mom on the other side, no, really, he's a great dad, just your relationship was not good for him, and it led to negative outcomes for him. Now that he's gotten the help he needs, he's out of the relationship, he's fine. He's totally appropriate for the children.
Capacity to be a father.
Sometimes excellent capacity to be a father. Even better than he was before.
Wow. Well, that leads me to my question around, so, we had a conversation behind the scenes, and Dr. Malovich, you had mentioned, we talked a little bit about trauma and how people bring their traumas into relationships.
Right.
And then you said that there's a differentiation between, big T trauma, little T trauma, and sort of what have you seen in these, as you're counseling, people through this, what have you seen, and what is the difference between a big T trauma, little T trauma? So how can you differentiate?
Yeah, traditionally when psychologists talk about trauma, we're talking about the kind of trauma that you see in post-traumatic stress disorder. And post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, is specifically trauma that a person experiences as a threat to their life. They feel like it's possible that they're going to lose their life, or severe injury or damage is going to happen. So we would consider major, big T, if you will, traumas like war situations, natural disasters, serious domestic violence, assault, sexual violence, child abuse. Those are things that cause some long-lasting, deep-seated trauma in people, and that they often need specialized treatment for, and that's very likely going to affect them later in their life.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's happened, kind of unfortunately, is our society's increasing familiarity with psychological and psychiatric terminology has caused some of these things to flow over into daily life. So, for instance, we hear a lot of people say, "Oh, my divorce is traumatic," or if my children have to change schools, they'll be traumatized, or if we have to give up our family home, it'll be a trauma for the family. That's really kind of a misuse of the traditional meaning of trauma. That's what we would say. Kind of, some people use the idea of sort of little t, right? That it's a change, it might be a challenge for them. But it's not. They're not going to experience it as a threat to their life, and they're very unlikely to have any long-term psychological or emotional or physical problems because of it.
Yeah.
It's a life change, but we would expect them to adapt to it and have normal adjustment following that.
Yeah. And when you were saying the implications on children, it could be. If handled in a way where people are addressing their big T traumas, even the little T traumas, if handled in a way that is, I guess less maladaptive in a sense. What are the implications to children? How have you seen it work out well? What does that look like? And then what is the other side of the coin to that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I see when parents handle the process of divorce or separation in a healthy way, the kids do amazingly well. What you'll see is kids who don't really have anything other than sort of temporary adjustment issues, like they're adjusting to a new school perhaps, or adjusting to disruption in their day-to-day life or their day-to-day routine, especially if there's changes in housing, neighborhood and schools and that sort of
Having
thing.
to navigate the parent time exchanges,
Yeah.
just getting used to mom's house, dad's house.
Yeah, but oftentimes they adjust to it pretty seamlessly, especially really young kids.
Oh yeah.
Interestingly, like if they're toddlers, if they're toddlers, that becomes the norm for them, and they don't. You see kids who don't have really any after effects of parents divorcing young, and they have happy adjustment and they have two homes and have always lived that way, and they don't see it as a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the maladaptive way, or what are those implications?
Yeah. It's not good.
It's bad. It's not good.
Not good at all.
What have you seen?
Parents in really high conflict can be really damaging to their kids, to where children get very allied with one parent as a caretaker or as a parentified child who becomes the caretaker in the home, even of the younger children. You'll see parents and children in a setting where the oldest child takes charge of the little ones and relates to them like a parent and discounts their own parental influence on their lives. They feel like they don't need a parent anymore because they're like a little adult.
Yeah.
So that can cause a lot of long-term problems.
Yeah.
You'll see some kids who identify with a parent who is a perpetrator. So, for instance, in a domestic violence scenario, children might reject that behavior and feel protective of the other parent and feel, like they need to, again, kind of protect the parent that's being victimized. Other children will identify with the perpetrator because they see that's the way to get what you want in this family.
Interesting.
And if you're a bully in this family, you get treated better and you get more of what you want. So I'm going to identify with that person. Plus, it's safer, right? If there's a parent in the home who's abusive, aligning with them and currying favor with them might be a little safer position. So you'll see kids who actually kind of mirror a perpetrator's behavior and become abusive toward one of their parents.
Yeah.
Ooh, what kind of adults do they become?
I've seen that. Oh, not good adults. And I've definitely seen that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've had an opposing party who was that kid that identified with the perpetrating dad.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not a good divorce at all. It's been pretty horrible.
Yeah.
It's been very costly for my client. It's been, she endured a lot of trauma with him in the marriage, and I will say trauma, the big T, because there was domestic violence in that marriage, and now he's using the legal system to further perpetrate that violence on her. Wow. Yeah, that's the unfortunate reality is with those high conflict cases, particularly with domestic violence, is the perpetrators will then use the system to continue that perpetration because it's expensive. No divorce attorney is cheap. None of us are cheap.
What are we looking at in terms of cost? Like, what is an average cost of divorce? Even more locally here in Utah.
So what I'll say is that the starting out, I'm not going to say most, but there are many attorneys who are starting out at $250 an hour, and then you can get as high as probably about $550, $600 an hour. And then the starting retainer is anywhere from $1,500 to $15,000.
Okay.
And I will say most of our divorces, I think the cheapest divorce I've done here recently was $8,000. And it's because it was a collaborative divorce. So there was no litigation at all.
What is a collaborative divorce?
Collaborative is fantastic. It is exactly what the word means. It is a collaborative process. It's not a litigation process. Litigation is necessarily adversarial. It's party A versus party B, and there's a dispute, and the court needs to decide who's right, who wins. That works really well when a contract has been broken, when someone has fallen on something at a store that should have been fixed a long time ago, when a truck driver falls asleep behind the wheel and kills someone in a car, when someone shoots their neighbor. That process works really well because we're trying to figure out who is at fault, Who did something wrong? In family law, no one and everyone did something wrong.
Yeah.
Everyone's to blame. No one's to blame. It's not, there's no right and wrong. Both party A and party B both contributed to the breakdown of the marriage. Neither of them contributed to it. So it's not a process where you find out, is party A correct and party B wrong? It's how do we unwind these two people from their marriage like a business? How do we wind it down? How do we separate everything? And since we have children, how do we figure out what to do with the children? Where do they live? So what collaborative does, it's not party A versus party B. It's the family unwinding together. So it's done in you've signed an agreement, a very specific agreement that says we are not going to court, we're not going to litigate this, we are going to be completely open and honest in everything that we're doing. We're going to sign a release and a waiver saying that we agree that the attorneys for each side will be allowed to email the entire team together, because there are ethical things where attorneys cannot email an opposing party and discuss the case. But we agree to keep all communications to one email stream. And of course, the specific party and their counsel can have outside conversations. That's totally fine. Yeah. But for the main discussions, everything is in one email, so that everyone is on the same page at the same time.
Very transparent. Yeah.
Incredibly transparent. Everyone completes a financial declaration together, so everyone knows what accounts are where the money's at, where the retirement account's at, how much is owing on the house, what vehicles do we have, what loans outstanding do we have. And then we work through that through several meetings, much like this, face-to-face, all around one table. We have an agenda of what we're going to discuss. We often involve neutrals, like a financial neutral, to come in and say, here's what your divorce looks like, what your estate looks like, here's how much money is available for each of your households. Let's look at goals, not positions. If your goal is, I want to be financially secure, let's see if we can get both of you there. If your goal is to have a fair and equitable division of the estate, let's get you there. It's not, my position is I want alimony at $10,000 a month for 8 years maximum. And the other person, I want no alimony for any amount of time, and I don't want to pay any child support. Those are positions.
Yeah.
And we sometimes bring in psychological neutrals because divorce is...
It's messy.
It's messy. It's a grieving process, and the emotions can sometimes get in the way of the negotiations. And they help bring the temperature in the room down in the way attorneys can't.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, is Utah... are we set up to support this, like, women, I guess? And I wonder also, just to take it even a step deeper, is because, I think we kind of touched on this a little bit. There's cultural aspects. So Black and brown communities experiencing kind of domestic or civil type of situation. Is there a difference in how Utah or the court system kind of manages those? Have you seen that in the courtroom? Basically, is there racism?
So
what does that have to play into this stuff?
Yeah, I will say I think there are still biases in the justice system.
Yeah.
I would say it's more so in likely the criminal context. I haven't seen much of a difference in family law, in domestic.
Okay.
I've seen a bit in juvenile, in child welfare and delinquency.
Okay.
I have seen it a bit there because juvenile court tends to be more of a socioeconomic check more than anything. Yeah. If you have a high-income, affluent family coming in with an abuse allegation, chances are good that the court's going to look at them very differently than a parent who's residing at one of the shelters and has a whole history of substance use disorder and maybe some past convictions. Even the ones who don't have convictions and come in looking like they've lived a rough life, they're going to be judged very differently than, say, you walking in the door or Natalie and I walking in the door.
Yeah.
Very different. So, yeah, that does exist. I don't see it as much, though, in divorce.
Okay. Yeah. And then, Dr. Malovich, in the same, because you and I were just recently talking about sort of economic disparities. And so those who have the resources to, one, get an attorney or to get even therapy or anything, any kind of support, what have you seen there? Are they just well adjusted, or because they had the resources, or do you see more, I guess, dangerous people and even in that space?
Surprisingly, not necessarily.
Yeah.
When I started doing custody evaluations, one of the things that I got a really, real world education in was how many people in our culture have financial resources. They drive nice cars, they have good jobs, they have big houses, and they have a variety of pretty serious psychological difficulties and coping skills. They're able to, their resource. I think their resources allow them to appear more functional than they might be, and a lot of the dysfunction is behind closed doors. So, for instance, what Nicole's talked about in terms of domestic violence, family secrets, difficult family histories, personality disorders that affect their parenting and their partnering in really difficult, damaging ways.
Yeah,
very much so. It's clients, when they're accused of something awful, abuse, they'll say, well, I can get all these letters from family and friends. And it's like the court has seen that. They've seen the litany of people in support of, say, a bishop and how wonderful he is when behind closed doors
and
he's
to
abusing
validate
children.
A personnel or a persona that they're trying to carry.
Right, exactly. It's abuse is pervasive, and the courts do know that. So it tends, I'm not going to say always, tends not to go well when you have just that litany of neighbors saying, oh, he's the best dad ever, he would never do this, he's great. But no, in reality, he's been abusing his kids the whole time, and it's taken one brave child or mom to step forward and say this is happening.
Do you see that a lot here in Utah?
I do. Yes.
It's interesting because, and I asked that question too because we've lived in Utah for a long time, and there is this there is a very strong sense of family values, and we share that as statewide, and then you have the religion that's a big impact in that. What's actually happening behind closed doors? What are you seeing behind closed doors?
Not good things. Yeah, I tend to see the worst of the worst. I don't do the simple stuff much anymore unless it's collaborative. But so I do tend to see the worst cases, and I need to remind myself that I'm seeing the 1% of cases in the state. I don't see the vast majority of cases. 99.9% of the cases out there are just fine. There's not that much abuse going on, but in most of my cases, I'll say probably 80% of my cases, I have some type of abuse that's occurred, either during the marriage or after separation. So I see the absolute worst. And so I do see the high-standing Latter-day Saint families who on the surface were just amazing and doing wonderfully, and everyone in the community loved them, but behind closed doors, it was a different story. Yeah. And it can be difficult. That's where a lot of the shame does come in as well, wanting to hide what's happened and not wanting it to come out.
Sure. Yeah. So interesting. I'm curious, what are some of those unresolved traumas that come to the surface that you see, or very common unresolved traumas that you see adults, whether it be during a divorce or during separation or after a divorce? What are some things that you see that you help people through?
Oftentimes, it's really, I think difficult divorces are related to people's own difficult childhoods. And a lot of people that we see who struggle in divorce had broken families with very unhealthy relationships. So sometimes they mirror those patterns. So for instance, if a parent or if a parent was raised by one parent and not allowed to see the other parent, for example, in a family where the mom raised the children and either didn't have access to the dad or the mom intentionally kept the children from the dad, that child, when they grow up, might be more at risk to follow some of those same patterns, to reenact some of those dynamics, and feel like they can do it all themselves and they don't need a father around for the children. So I'll see repeat factors like that. Or if somebody was in a domestic violence relationship and didn't obtain the treatment and the support they needed, they may be at greater risk to choose relationships that are abusive. And again, reenact those kind of dynamics, expose kids to danger because they never resolve their own issues and don't see themselves as worthy, perhaps, of protection or worthy of good treatment.
Yeah.
So do you see a lot of that?
Poor choices.
Do you see that a lot of that? Do you see any kind of gender dynamic around that? Is that just kind of widely just?
I've seen it in both directions. Interestingly enough, I think the the stereotype is that most DV victims are women, and we certainly the greater percentage of them are women, but there's still a significant percentage of men who are victims of domestic violence as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they oftentimes carry huge burdens of shame and embarrassment in sharing that information.
Not only that, law enforcement doesn't respond well to them either.
Yes.
I've had many male clients who were physically abused during the marriage, but when they called law enforcement came out and did nothing. Or the woman would attack and he'd push her away, and then he would get arrested because he pushed her away. Even though he has scratch marks on him and a black eye from what she did, he gets arrested for it. And so the male clients I have had, I don't think I've ever had any of them that have actually been successfully prosecuted their wives for domestic violence.
None.
Oh. No, they were either arrested and they had the protective order against them and we had to get a mutual one, or they just let it go. They never reported it, which is just as bad.
Wow. Okay. Wow. You don't know these things, right? Because there's these, when you think about divorce, even when you think about domestic violence, you don't really, there's this sort of mentality that men they just suck. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah,
like they're the ones. Mm-hmm. And so there's the other side to that. And I think that's very interesting. Do you think that men carry more shame around divorce? I mean, just because you were saying that women, let me rewind a little. Women, are they the ones seeking divorce? I've seen it online that women are the ones that are constantly the ones to kind of call the shot at the end of it, or at least to say this needs to end up in a divorce. Do you see that pattern at all, or is it?
I haven't seen that so much.
Okay,
I haven't seen that. I don't know what. Yeah, I don't know what the research
Maybe
shows.
I'm just yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen
that. Would probably be more nationwide research on who the filing party is,
the
first filing party is. Yeah, I don't know, because I've had a pretty, anecdotally, it seems like a pretty decent mix. I'd have to go back through all of my cases to see who filed first. Sometimes they file the same day, and that's always fun, because then it becomes for them in their mind like a jockeying for status sort of competition of, well, I filed first, therefore.
Sort of like who gets to the bank first.
Yeah, it really is. When it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
The court doesn't care. Yeah. There's a bit of an equal burden of proof in a divorce. Everyone's got to prove by preponderance of the evidence what they want to have and see done. So it doesn't really matter who goes first at all.
Yeah. Even if you don't have like an exact percentage, but just from what you've seen, both of you, how many of these marriages could actually be saved?
By the time I get them, none.
None of them. Okay, so at that point, it's very volatile.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, by the time they get to me, it's they're beyond repair. They're irretrievable. And early in my career, I had one that reconciled. One.
Really? Well, after the whole process of divorce?
No, we were in the process.
Okay, during the process. Okay.
As Nicole mentioned, I think she and I are both probably outliers in terms of the kinds of clients that we get.
Because they're high.
Particularly high conflict, or, I joke about this, that as a psychologist, I didn't somehow put together that I would not get a random sample of mediation clients either. And so I get mediation clients cases where there's abuse dynamics, or where there are children with special needs, or where somebody has pretty serious psychological problems. And it's really common for those cases to come my way. So we don't see a random sample.
No.
I have, and this is just anecdotal, I have recently, as I've been in the mediation field longer, I'm starting to get more regular referrals of pro se people, that is, people who aren't represented by attorneys. And they seem to be a really different group, especially when they're seeking mediation.
Okay.
I think because they're seeking mediation. Again, it's not a random sample. They're not fighting about it and fighting it at the court. But I've had several families recently who've come to me who aren't even separated yet, and they want to find a way to separate amicably and have a plan that if they get divorced, they have a good plan in place for the children and continuity for the kids. And I've been kind of shocked. And there's a little part of me that wants to go, are you sure you can't work this out? Because if you can work this well together as a team, is divorce the only option? But that's kind of a new thing for me to be seeing those people.
I love that. I really do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is great. There are a few clients that I've I've sent to maybe even you, because they're friends of mine, and I will not get in the middle of a friend divorce. And those are people that I do read the Riot Act to, of you will not talk to your children about the causes of the divorce. You will not disparage the children. You will keep them out of it. You will not leave pleadings lying around. You will talk to them together and say, this is us, not you. And I tell them, if you do not do any of those things, I swear to everything that is holy, I will testify against both of you in favor of your children at any trial.
Yeah.
And you will no longer be my friends, because I do not want to see your children put through that. I love your kids too much. And so I'm hopefully, maybe that's some of my friends who've sent to you.
Because now you have to wonder, are they your friends still or not?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't cut off contact with anyone at all recently. I think the last time I did was college, but yeah. So very likely, yeah. Yeah, so maybe.
Wow.
But I don't ask. I don't get involved. I just take it as it comes, and if they want to share, they share, but I'd rather not. It's too close.
And some of it, I think some of the high conflict and even dynamics that can be emotionally abusive to kids, some of that is related to people with serious psychological problems. Sometimes it's really a matter of education. There are some parents who think they're doing the right thing and think, for instance, the parent who has a commitment to honesty will say, well, I think, it's their lives. They have the right to know what's happening in the divorce, so I talk to them a lot about it. And they maybe don't completely realize how damaging that is, or how that's putting their child in an untenable situation where they have to choose loyalty between mom or dad. And so sometimes I think you can, with those kind of talks and with that kind of education, you can kind of help head it off before it happens.
Yeah.
Asking the kid where they want to live. That's one. Like, well, they should have a choice. It's like, no, they should not actually. They have no choice in this right now. The adults make that decision. And here's why. If you ask them where they want to live, it's going to put them in a loyalty bind between mom and dad. They're going to disappoint somebody somewhere, and they have to suddenly become an adult.
They're going to tell mom one thing, tell dad another thing.
Yeah, it's a huge burden for a child, horrible for their self-esteem and their functioning. And what they need to hear is that mom and dad got it covered. We will tell you what it's going to be. The one time there was a couple who said, oh, we talked to the kids about custody, and everyone in the room just kind of tightened up and gasped, and we all went, okay, no, you're not supposed to do that. And said, well, no, we agree on 50-50 custody. We're talking to them about what schedule they wanted, like what days will work better with mom, what days will work better with dad. And we all took a sigh and went, okay, that's okay. That's okay. Because they were
as long as the framework is set.
Right. Yeah. They were tweenish, teenish children. They were, I think, between the ages of 11 and 13. And so it's like, okay, that's appropriate. These are kids that are going to have preferences of where to be on what days, and they have their activities. And that made sense. And that made me feel better, but oh my goodness. Because anytime I hear someone say, well, I asked little Johnny where he wanted to live, and he said he wants to live with me full time. He doesn't want to see dad ever again. And you go, yeah, great.
Little Johnny hasn't even developed his brain fully.
Little Johnny doesn't want to make mom mad, because evolutionary-wise, he wants to make sure he keeps mom happy, so he's not left outside of the cave to be eaten by bears. So he's going to tell you that.
That's right. Do you is there an age where, I mean, because you had mentioned 3-year-olds, if done right, I guess in a way that's healthy, they don't really feel the impacts. Is there a certain age that kids really feel the impacts of divorce, and then it really can be hard on them? Have you seen a certain age group?
I've seen teenagers to even young adult children.
Yeah, I think, it certainly is more related. I think the more impactful variables are how the parents are handling it and dealing with it. But I think in general, teenagers have a
really harder time.
Yeah, in part because it's so much of a disruption to their lives, and their lives are becoming a bigger part of the pie of the family life, so that their independent activities and friendships and social events and extracurricular activities, all those things become more important to them.
Yeah.
And spending time with mom or dad become much less important. And so it's a huge disruption for them oftentimes.
Yeah, and it makes it difficult for the parents, because they want time with that teen, but as a teen, you don't want time with your parents anyway, whether they're divorced or together. So it does make those parent time schedules and exchanges very difficult, because then you have 16-year-old daughters saying, yeah, I don't want to go to dad's this weekend. I want to go to my friend's birthday party. We're going up to the cabin with their family, and I don't want to go to dad's. And then dad's saying, well, your mom's keeping you away from me, and it creates a conflict. And really, the kid is just being a kid. They want to do their thing and kind of decide where they want to go, and that makes it very tricky on the legal side of things.
Yeah.
Because you can't just put them in a car seat, strap them in, take them to dad's, drop them off, and
Right.
say, sorry.
Right. Oh, and so what about those? This is just coming to mind because I'm thinking about, grown-ups in my family. I'm thinking about those who stayed in a marriage because of the kids, because the fear of, I don't know what this is going to do to my children. But then later on in life, as the children grow up and they live their own lives, perhaps they get married, they have their own lives. There comes a point where some either just stay together or they actually do get divorced. I wonder how much of that is like high conflict at that point. Have you seen a lot of just divorces
Like later
in life with
who've been
older
married for many
couples?
years.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
I've been seeing a lot more of those too.
lately.
The gray
Yeah.
divorces, yeah. The worst
The
are
gray divorces.
the worst is when they're not like in their 60s, they're in their 80s, because then it tends to be the adult kids kind of driving things.
And making the decisions.
Not so much the decisions, but being the
Support system.
instigator behind some
got
of the
it.
conflict.
Oh, got it.
So it can be very, very tricky. Those have their own whole basket of horribles.
Oh, wow.
Very
Okay.
different sort of dynamic than dealing with young children.
Yeah. So what would you say to someone right now, one of our listeners that's contemplating divorce at the moment and not entirely sure what to consider? What are some things that you would, I guess, what kind of questions can that person ask themselves to either prepare or to think about as they navigate this dilemma?
That's tricky. I can handle the legal side of this one if you want.
Yeah.
So so from the legal side of things, what they need to know from the forefront is that divorce will ruin you financially. Unless you are a family that brings in millions of dollars a year and you have millions and millions of dollars in savings, you will be ruined financially. There will not be enough money to go around. Your lifestyle is going to be upended because you cannot take two incomes supporting one household, break it up into two, and expect it to be the same.
Yeah.
So it is going to change, and to be very prepared for that change. And I will say that is probably the hardest part of my discussions and mediations with clients is they have not fully, allowed that to sink in for them. And it is awful during the mediation. It's a lot of tears, a lot of fear, sometimes disrupted mediations resulting in multiple mediations. It's very, very difficult. Those finances are very, very hard, oftentimes harder than letting go of the child.
I see that as well in mediations, that
Yeah.
oftentimes, the catchphrase I joke about is, this isn't about the money, and that's always kind of means it's a little bit about the money.
Yeah.
And I see, especially if one party has been the primary breadwinner and maybe done the finances as well, if there's a partner in the marriage who doesn't do finances, doesn't understand finances, they see they see the financial disclosures and they see big numbers on a tax return and they think, oh, there's a lot of money that must be being withheld from me.
Right. It's being
Because they're
hidden.
hiding
it.
money.
Yeah.
That's a really common
Very common.
misconception because they think if we had this much money, there would be more money to go around. Or they insist that there is more money. And so they think that they have an unrealistic idea about pursuing they may be the person pursuing the divorce, but they think their lifestyle is not going to change.
Yeah, that I see that a lot. I
just-
want
they
everything
just
to continue the
don't
same,
anticipate it.
just without my partner in the picture. I just get to carry on my life in my house and do the things I
They
always
don't want
did.
to sell the house and they don't want
No, get on a budget.
Okay.
That's a big one. I have seen clients who are more middle high income people who lived very frugally during the marriage. They can do fine. I have seen them do fine. They don't have millions of dollars hanging out, but they have been very wise in how they spend their money and maybe they haven't gone on any vacations maybe, and they always buy their cars cash and their house is paid off, and those do okay.
Yeah.
But that's incredibly rare. I think I've maybe had 2 of those in my career. So that is a very rare subsect of society that I see. The other thing I would say is if you have children and you're divorcing, not having your kids with you part-time is going to be difficult. From what I've heard from clients, from family members who've been divorced, it's like they're unmoored during that time that their children are gone. And eventually they do get to a place where when they don't have their kids, they do everything they want to do. They either stay out late or they work late or they just go to the gym constantly or they're out with friends. And then when they're with their kids, they are just on and they're just totally focused on their kids and they prefer it. But it is a change. It is a massive change, and many people aren't ready for that change. They haven't anticipated that level of a change in their life.
The other population I see that really struggles with that are young couples who are really just maybe starting out. They're not completely financial. They maybe don't financially stable. They maybe don't own their own home, or they've just purchased their first home. Maybe one of them is underemployed or unemployed, and they just don't have the resources to get legal help and the legal advice that they need. And this kind of ties in the profession. We talk a lot about access to justice, and it's really challenging when you see people that really need legal assistance and there's not really a way for them to get the help they need to navigate this in a healthy way.
Yeah, so if someone is contemplating divorce or a couple's contemplating divorce, there is discernment therapy that I've recently learned of, probably in the last few months,
Discernment therapy.
Yes, it's to specifically see is this marriage going to be salvageable, or should you really maybe look really hard at divorce? There are a few therapists in town who are doing it. I've heard good things about it, and I've heard people say, "Yep, I went and we realized, this is not salvageable. Our differences are too great for us to stay together for, just our personalities. It's not going to work. We have different goals. We have different ideas in mind for the future." And so far what I've seen, and the one case I've seen with that, it's been pretty peaceful.
Okay.
Because it's not it's your fault that you did this. I gave up everything for you to do this. How dare you? And the other side is saying, well, I gave up everything that I loved about this for you, and how dare you say this? And it's a lot of that mudslinging.
Back and forth, right.
Yes, and the mudslinging, the courts really don't care. They don't care who caused the downfall of the marriage, unless you're talking about fault with alimony. And for that, you've got to have some pretty severe domestic violence, sex abuse, something horrible for the court to take into account. Otherwise, they don't care.
Yeah,
they really don't. They don't care that dad took the kid to daycare more than mom, or that mom did the dishes more than dad. They don't. It doesn't matter for them. It's the marriage is broken.
Yeah.
But for them, it's very important. For the clients, it's
right.
very, very important that the judge knows that
who I
he's
am
just
in this
horrible,
marriage,
right?
and who he is or who she is in the marriage.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. In terms of maybe the flip side to that, have you seen people? I mean, I hear so many stories about people who are really happy out of the marriage, out of divorce. Divorce itself was really ugly and hard, and there was a lot to be confronted with. But then afterwards, there's a sense of freedom. And even though there's a change in finances and there's a change in custody and just time with your kids, or even if you don't have kids, just time with yourself. Have you seen sort of the aftermath? And I know you don't follow your clients all the way through their life, but have you? I guess how many of those do you see that does feel like the person's just better off? I mean, apparently, obviously with domestic violence and sexual abuse and all the bigger level of the high conflict that you deal with, they're better off. But for those who maybe, difference in personality, difference in, labor, difference in how we parent, are they better off?
I have seen those because of modifications. Someone will come back to me for a modification, and I didn't represent them in the divorce. And I get to hear all about how horrible the marriage was and the divorce was, and how happy they are now that they're no longer in that relationship, and how much they've been able to grow, and they've remarried, and wow, the mistakes they made the first time around, they're not making the second time around. And what a relief it was to be divorced. I've seen it in cases where I'm doing a premarital agreement or a prenuptial agreement for a second or third marriage. And
I was going to ask, about that.
and how they're just like, yes, I'm not making the same mistakes I made last time. This is what went way south in my first divorce and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars in some cases, and what they want to hedge off. So for some people, absolutely.
Yeah.
It is like, I've been told it's like a weight being lifted off of your shoulders. And so it's always weird when I get the signed decree and findings from the court in the email and I send it to them like, congratulations, you're divorced.
Do we celebrate this?
Do we celebrate this? You're right. I always say
Right.
congratulations because I know it's been a journey that we've
Sure.
been through together. But
Yeah.
I'm always wondering, like, should I be congratulating you on this?
I think getting through the process, that
Right.
makes sense.
You're like, great news, you're divorced. Oh, that does not sound great.
Okay, well, I mean, I have so many other questions, just so many. Maybe we do a part 2 soon, but I feel like there's just been, a lot of my friends, just my inner circle, folks that have been in long-term relationships or marriages and have contemplated divorce over and over and over again. And it's just to hear the other side of it, because I think there's also this, culturally, it's kind of like, well, you can always get a divorce. It's no longer, yes, it may, the stigma exists, but that is still an option. You're never stuck.
Right.
But to understand what you're actually walking into is a different story. And so to prepare yourself for something like that. And then perhaps maybe, what was that, you said the therapy before?
Discernment therapy.
Discernment therapy.
Right.
Maybe that will help clarify things a bit so that you
Right.
feel confident walking into whatever direction you decide.
Right.
I think that's really helpful, especially right now.
Well, and I think also realizing that you are going to grieve. That's the biggest
right.
surprise for a lot of clients that I talk to, is that it's a grieving process. You need to take it seriously. Another one of our custody evaluator colleagues told me that divorce is the second worst thing you'll ever go through in your life. And so take it very, very, very seriously. Don't dismiss it. Don't treat it like it's just an everyday thing. Get into an individual therapist right away to grieve that relationship, because it's a death.
Yeah.
It is a death.
Yeah.
And the worst thing you're going to go through is death of a child.
Yeah.
So it is.
Wow.
It's
So second to
important.
that.
Yes.
And part of it is, I think people grieve. We grieve the loss of the person and who they were, but we grieve who we wanted them to be and what we wanted the relationship
What
to
we
be.
thought the relationship.
What we hoped the marriage would look like.
what that future would look like, and the future you.
So it's
too.
a lot to grieve.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. It's a big transformation afterwards.
Very much so.
Imagine. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So focusing on the positive, not the negative, is helpful. But also, you've just got to let yourself grieve it. So I try to sit back very, very patiently, let the grieving process happen in front of me, keep trying to guide them to, I know you're sad. I know you're experiencing it in this way, and you want to resolve your sadness by taking it out on your ex-spouse, and that's not going to be helpful. It's not going to make this process any better. It'll make it worse.
Yeah. And so you both work hand in hand, side to side. I mean, I
We do
know-
in cases.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
We do sometimes
Sometimes.
work in
Okay.
cases, yeah.
Okay.
I have definitely picked Natalie specifically for cases because I know that either my client or the opposing party or both
Yeah.
need to have her
Yes.
specifically to
Yeah,
help
yeah.
work through this and have that extra guiding hand, because I know I can't do it alone. I've got to focus on numbers also and working on spreadsheets and keeping the legal issues up here
Right.
so that Natalie can handle the emotions
Yeah.
and unpack them so I can do my job.
Wow. Incredible work that you both do. And I know you, Nicole, I know you personally, and I just met you, but I understand the level of care that you have for your clients. And you had even mentioned, you said that it's really important to truly care about your clients and be there for them. And we had talked a little bit about boundaries, like how do
Right.
you hold space for the very difficult
Right.
conversations and emotions that people are grappling with. And, you hold those spaces, but you also carry some of that with you.
Right. It's
And
impossible
that's
not to carry some of it.
unless you don't care. And
Right.
so I really appreciate the level of care and love that you have for your work and your clients. And I think this is such a helpful conversation because there's a lot of people out there right now that are navigating, either really tough relationships, maybe even dangerous relationships. And so to hear that there are avenues and there are ways to navigate them. And also, for those who are just, it's not as, I guess, dire, but it's dire to them to really kind of figure it out. And there's resources for that. And so I appreciate the work you both do. Thank you so much for your time.
You're very welcome.
appreciate
Very
you.
welcome. Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us here.
Salem.
Thank you.